Hey everyone, and we're back here for another phase of a risk assessment process. We did devices and identify function of the cybersecurity framework, and we did a devices and protect. Today we're going to talk about devices and the detect function of the NIST cybersecurity framework. Now, just a side note here, I will add the governance function, because since I started this, NIST came out with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. So I will add the governance function here as an additional process for us to do this risk assessment. Might as well just update it, correct? So how we do a risk assessment on devices and validate the detect function of the NIST cybersecurity framework. Now, what is detect? You can go to the NIST cybersecurity framework and read what the detect function actually means. And based on that, you will develop a scope and objective of your assessment. That is very important. What is the scope? But even more important. So that is at least for me. But take a listen. Maybe it's for you as well. Is to establish what is out of scope. Why is that? Because that will answer and actually preemptively answer any questions that might arise. Why you did choose this devices versus that device? Why? Well, here's the scope, and here is the limitations of this assessment and the out of scope devices that I decided based on this justification or whatever. You will define that for your assignment in assessing those devices. So you decide which ones are in scope. Then you're going to set clear objectives. And you can go three different ways here. One is you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of the existing detection. That's one. The second, you will determine the timeliness. How timely is the detection of a particular compromise? And the third is assessing the detection capabilities. Now, you can go and do all three, but making sure that when you do your timeline, that you allot enough time to perform all three functions, or you can do along the way. But either way, it will take more time. So if you decide to do one versus the other, make sure that objective is clear right off the set. So you come up with the devices that are in scope, what devices will be out of scope, and what is the objective of your assessment. Once you have those, you can start gathering the information. And by doing so, you're going to gather that information by two methods. One, you're going to review documentations that are available, even past assessments. And then you will do interviews or meetings. You identify the subject matter expert for those devices, set the schedule, and meet with them. Starting with the identify, now you have them. You have the devices that are in scope, and have a chat with them. So what devices that you have here that are communicating with your SIM? That could be one of the first questions, because if everything will be triggered by the SIM alert, you better be communicating with it. But you review those with them. You ask the expert the detection mechanisms they have implemented, and that might be your system administrator. The common challenge they face in detecting activities. Basically, do you have any exceptions in place that you decide not to scan? Most common that you might see is antivirus causing performance issues in certain applications. And for that matter, your expert might have asked to the scan to be turned off in a particular directory. Is that directory not reporting to your SIM or any local device that is scanning? All of a sudden, now you have a sort of a blind spot on that particular device. Is that isolated for that device, or all devices under your scope of that assessment? So you start peeling apart what EDRs applications you have on a device itself. You have any IDSs, IPS on a network, so on and so forth. How updated the antivirus signature is. What not only you have those devices, but what are the triggers you have for your IDS and IPS? What are the triggers you have on your SIM? Remember, collecting logs doesn't mean you're monitoring. Collecting log is just what it says, collecting. Alerting is the area that will trigger the detection mechanism. So you need to review those triggers and make sure they are cover the assessment that you're trying to perform here. Now, in terms of effectiveness of your devices, the detection mechanism, there's two ways you can do it. One is an active and one is a passive. The active is you will engage in a vulnerability assessment and or a penetration test of those devices. So you identify the scope, engage a penetration test team, internally or external, to assess those. And as these are being performed, you will be monitoring the detection capabilities of your cybersecurity team. You can also do that in a way that your cybersecurity team is not aware that is being conducted, and also measure their reaction time and their identifying time of that particular event. And you see how they are performing as well, in addition to the detection mechanisms. The other one is your vulnerability assessment. It involves basically scanning devices for unknown weaknesses and security vulnerabilities, and see if that SIM detect that scan, the active scan. That would be another way to do, but most often you will see organization engaging in penetration test. But be conscious that penetration tests are very limited. They will do the first way in and will not search for all possible ways to get into your network. They will only search the fastest way because of the way these engagements are arranged is based on time. But knowing that those are the limitations of this particular assessment, then you combine with a vulnerability assessment, perhaps you can make more of a holistic assessment, having those running at the same time. Or you engage in more extensive penetration test with a more broad and more timely sort of a statement of work that they can not only get in, but validate other ways they could have exploited in getting on your network. That is also potential. It's up to your organization, it's up to your team to do that. The passive one is doing log analysis and false positive reviews. And that when you go to your collecting your logs, most likely your SIM, you will see there what alerts you have. Have you investigated this alert? Have you taken any action about this alert? When was the attack and when was your response time? All of those will count as part of your passive assessment. Analyzing any anomalies, identifying mechanisms, identifying indicators of a compromise. Have you investigated? What was the outcome? Did you close out that? How long it took? Who you notified? Who you involved? All of those and any other suspicious flags that you see on your SIM. Also, if you want to identify them individually, review the IDSs, the IPSs, the antivirus logs. If they are not sending to your SIM, or yes, they are sending, but let me check them as well. Because imagine if the compromise was in a way that the attacker gained administrative access, they could have turned off those logs. So you could also investigate those logs. It's up to you, once again, how you will define those. What was your objective initially of this assessment? That's why it's important not only knowing how to do this, but establishing that objective that will drive everything else throughout the S. The other one is evaluate false positives. How many of those? Are you tuning in those false positives? Or the false positives actually are bringing so much noise that are actually diminishing your reaction because, oh, yes, I know about that. It's a false positive. We get those all the time. And that will diminish your effectiveness of identifying and reacting to those because you might be a real one, but you're just dismissing as a false positive. Those has to be taken care of. You need to clean those up, fine-tune your devices to make sure that you have reaction. Your team is reacting to actual potential compromises. That is also could be part of your assessment and your assessment reporting. The other part of this is the impact or incident response recovery. If this were to happen, how fast would an incident response be put into place? Now, this is just an assessment. You're actually not going to kick this in, but how would this be triggered? You can do this more of a passive way or a desktop exercise type of scenario, but do not trigger them. Now, why we're doing this now versus on the recover part or later on the cybersecurity functions is because this is also ensure that not only detect that you are able to do the next step. We're not going to execute, but we're going to do that. But you can review at this point past data. When it happened, how long it took to trigger those, and what was the outcome. You not necessarily need to happen right now. You can do a desktop exercise, but you can analyze past events and conduct post-instant review. That's basically what you're going to do. You review them, get 2 or 3, because you will have them, right? They will initially get started, and then you will find out, oops, nothing happened, nothing to investigate, and they will be turned down. But those you can investigate. Now, hopefully you don't have anything real to investigate, but if you have, that's a good way to see how effective was. I would pay close attention to the lessons learned. As you do those are very important because your program needs to continuously mature. If not, most definitely should be one of your recommendations as you move forward. Now, since I touched your recommendation, reporting recommendations. So document your findings as you see. Document your findings as the facts. But I would add another layer in here. Put into a story. You need to engage the audience that will be reading the report. You need to drive them through the entire scenario. Yes, I had a vulnerability that was exploited. With that exploit was gained access. And then with that access was elevated to administrator privileges. Yes, that is very punchy. It's very terse. And here happened, this happened, that happened. But that's not how you tell a story. Telling a story because the people reading can follow you. If this, based on the threat scenarios that we see in the industry today, an advantage was taken about this, and by taking the advantage of this vulnerability, the individual was able to gain access to the system as a user, and as a user, that individual had the capability to raise him or herself to administrator. By having an administrator on the system, this individual was capable of doing the job of any internal administrator that we have in our company that set our systems, that deploy systems for different projects. And based on that ability, they could do anything as an employee can do. Turn it on, turn it off stuff, delete stuff. So tell the story, get your reader involved, and be able to correlate that event to something that happens on an internal project. So now it becomes real. It becomes more real than just telling that terse fact and this happened, that happened, play by play. Although very exciting, and perhaps you're not going to engage every reader when you do that. Lastly, on that report, you need to put recommendations. You will have findings. Hopefully not major, but you will have findings. How can you mature the program? What was your observations? How could have you stopped that initial attack? Is there anything that could have been done? How can you improve the detection timing? Did any of your detection mechanisms fail to detect a particular indicator of compromise? Were everything being sent to the SIM? If that is the strategy, that is the architecture. And has the SIM detect that log that went in? If not, what triggers are missing? What rules are missing? And you start putting those together to make sure that you continually mature this process. Now, is a continuously process immature because attacks will change. Softwares will be different, versions will be different, so on and so forth. There's so many variables, but having that continuously. And now with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework version 2, governance got an elevated respect, if you will, now being a full function. And it will be interesting how organizations will adapt to that. Because now, not only that, you need to have documentations, policies, standards, procedures that ensure that continuously improvement is in place. So more to come on that. What would be the impact to organization and even companies that provide training in cybersecurity? Will they change? Well, we'll see. We'll chat this later on. So having these recommendations in a report is a great tool to close it out. Not only here's my finding, here's your problem, hey, but also how you're going to fix this. Some additional consideration when you get to this point is to make sure that you're very specific during your assessment. Evaluate the definitions effectively. Translate to specific actionable items that your reader can take and move forward and mature that program. Scalability. Make sure that what you assess in recommendations and mechanisms are scalable. It's not just solution driven. It's not just for this solution or these devices that you are assessing, but whatever you implement as these devices can be scalable for every device in your organization. What you're doing is a sample of your organization, making sure that it's scalable. And it, of course, is cost effective. If the cost of fixing is higher than the cost of the compromise, there's no reason to invest. There's no reason or motivation to fix it. Make sure it's cost effective implementing those. Well, this wraps up the assessment of devices against the detect function of the cybersecurity framework.